Let's get started. It's a bit of a rainy day here in Memphis today. So, haven't you had enough chicken? Mr. Music is over here. I bought him a whole chicken yesterday. You can't get enough of it. We're going to talk about postmaster provisionals on this episode. Provisionals. Well, what are provisionals? Well, let me see, where can I begin with this? Provisionals. Where do we begin? Where's a good place to start? Well, Stanley Pillar's book on provisionals is absolutely great. That's something you might start with. You can actually find a copy of it on within my free philatelic library at davidsachs.com. Somewhere at the top of the page there, I think. But let's see, where can I begin? There was an act of Congress on March the 3rd, 1845, and what it did is it standardized postal rates throughout the nation at 5 cents for a normal weight letter transported up to 300 miles, and 10 cents for a letter transported between 300 and 3,000 miles. And these rates became effective on July the 1st, 1945, 2 years before we issued our first postage stamps. Well, in Great Britain, this kind of uniformity had been adopted as a necessity prior to the first penny blacks that were issued in May of 1840, which were actually the world's first adhesive postage stamps. And they were used for prepayment of mail. Before this, what we call standardization, there were many different postal rates in different jurisdictions. And it made the fees somewhat unpredictable to prepay all letters with stamps as a matter of course. So the result was that the recipients of the letters, rather than the senders, had to pay the postage on them, which was not real cool, but that's what happened. So it was pretty much evident that Britain's standardization led us to do likewise in 1845 through an act of Congress. Preliminary versions of the act of March 3rd, 1845 also dealt with the possibility of issuing stamps, which was a pretty unique thing for its time. The law finally enacted didn't actually authorize the United States Post Office to do so. Well, what happened is that local postmasters realized that uniform rates made it practical for them to issue postage stamps of their own for prepayment of mail. And between 1845 and 1847, such postmasters' provisional stamps were sold in 11 United States municipalities. 11 municipalities sold postmaster provisionals. The first provisionals issued were those of New York and Baltimore, perhaps the most famous. And they appeared on July 14th and July 15th, 1845. Rather in July 14th, July 15th, yes, in 1845. And then New Haven, Connecticut, and St. Louis issues began to appear later that year. The rest of them, the remaining 7 jurisdictions, later introduced their stamps sometime in 1846. I've got somewhere around here, oh, here it is. I've got a Scott Specialized catalog, and in the front of the catalog, in the Specialized United States edition, there's a section on provisionals. Let's see if I can find that for you real quick. Here it is. See Postmaster Provisionals. And you can see examples if you go to the Scott Cataloger. You can find provisionals online certainly and see the various examples. The Alexandria example, the 5-cent example, the first, which is a kind of a manila kind of looking circular stamp. Then they had the Blue Boy in Alexandria, which is famous. Of course, the 5-cent Annapolis. You had the Buchanan 10-cent Baltimore, the Boscawen from New Hampshire, the Brattleboro from Vermont. You had the Lockport Provisional from Lockport, New York. The Millbury rather, which is a kind of a cartoonish-looking caricature of George Washington. On the envelope, I think recently sold for around $700,000 at auction. You had the Provisional from New Haven, Connecticut. Of course, the New York Provisionals, the Providence, Rhode Island Provisionals, and the well-known St. Louis Bears. Well, the designs of the 11 provisional issues varied widely in sophistication, design, as did the methods used to produce them. Anyway, 5 of them were actually printed in sheets from engraved plates. And they were the New York provisionals, which were printed on steel plates and 40 subjects. The Baltimore provisionals, which were 12 subjects, which featured 9 5-cent stamps, 3 10-cent stamps. The Baltimore also employed 3 hand stamps of the James M. Buchanan signature to imprint indicia, so to speak, on the envelopes, which is more or less an endorsement. The signature is not that of the future president, but of his cousin, James Madison Buchanan, who was the postmaster of Baltimore. You also had the Brattleboro provisionals, which were printed from copper plates of 10 subjects. The Providence, Rhode Island provisionals that were also printed with copper plates of 12 subjects, 11 5-cent stamps, and only one 10-cent stamp. Then, of course, the St. Louis Bears, which were copper plated in 6 subjects of 3 5-cent stamps and 3 10-cent stamps. And the plate was sometime later modified around 1846 to produce 1 5-cent stamp and 3 10-cent stamps. And actually, I think there were 2 20-cent stamps printed on that plate as well. 2 provisional issues were actually typeset. The Alexandria was a typeset issue, and the Boscawen issue was typeset. The Millbury stamp was printed from a woodcut, which I spoke about earlier in printing methods. The New Haven and Lockport issues were hand-stamped, actually. The Annapolis provisional was printed on an envelope. The rarest of the provisionals known in but a single copy are those of Boscawen and Lockport. Unique as well to stamp collectors is the Alexandria Blue Boy, the only surviving example on blue paper of that provisional. According to census data supplied by Robert Siegel Auctions, 6 additional copies of the Alexandria provisional are known, but all are on buff-colored paper. Notably rare as well are the provisionals of Annapolis. There are 2 copies of those. The New Haven, only 11 copies are known. The Millbury, there are 19 copies known. The Baltimore 10-cent labels are very scarce. Only 7 copies are known of those. There are actually 500 copies of the Brattleboro issue that were actually produced, but only 52 are remaining of those 500 copies are produced. Providence printed somewhere around 5,500 5-cent stamps and about 500 10-cent stamps. The first 2 printings of the St. Louis provisionals produced 2,000 5-cent stamps and 3,000 10-cent stamps. They also produced 1,000 20-cent stamps. The final printing probably added 1,500 or so 5-cent stamps and 1,500 or so 10-cent stamps actually making a grand total of 9,000 provisionals of the St. Louis Bears. Among the 11 provisionals, the New York issue was produced in the largest quantity by far, with 143,600 of those stamps delivered to the New York Post Office. The national United States stamps were actually introduced, the number 1 Benjamin Franklin, the number 2 Washington, were actually introduced on July 1st, 1847. And they essentially conform to the design features of the New York Postmaster's Provisional. The Provisional and National issues were designed and printed by the same New York firm, Rawdon, Wright, Hatch, and Edson, which you'll hear more of Rawdon, Wright, Hatch, and Edson later. With the issue of stamps for nationwide use, Postmaster Provisionals became obsolete. However, they were very important in accustoming the public to the use of stamps for the prepayment of postal fees. So there you have it. Once again, use the Scott catalog, and you can find so much information about Postmaster Provisionals in the Scott catalog. I hope you'll engage it and use it. Also, if you would, please subscribe to my channel and subscribe to Lynn's Stamp News. It's a great publication, absolutely fantastic publication. And become a member of the American Philatelic Society. That's a very, very, very good thing to do. All right, anyway, until next time, have a fantastic day ahead. And I guess I'll be talking to you again soon. Be well now. Bye.